I believe our next witness is 303, which is on page 396. Hello, can you hear me, Mr. Witness?
سلام بله سلام به همه
Greetings to all. Good afternoon. I can hear you.
Good afternoon. Would you repeat after me, please?
عصر شما هم بخیر بله
I solemnly declare that I will speak the truth,
سوگند
I solemnly declare to tell the truth,
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
There'll now be questions from counsel, followed by questions from the panel. Thank you.
Mr. Witness, you've given a very detailed statement to the tribunal,
بله بله
and for security reasons, you've withheld some information, so please be careful not to disclose that information when you're asked questions. Could you please tell the panel what happened on November 16th, which led to your detention?
What led to my arrest? It was 16th of November. I needed to do something at the hospital in our town. When I wanted to enter the hospital, I realized that the gates, there is a place where there are a number of gates to different hospitals and places. At that place, we realized that had become some sort of a military base. Everybody was in readiness with all the facilities and everything. When we saw that, like all other people, we believed that the protests for the petrol price increase was one reason to go to the streets. Because 40 years of corruption and crime was tolerated by all of us people. It was 8:30 or 9 when the first group of people turned out on the streets to protest. And based on the experience that the people had in the previous from the previous protests, we knew that the government would try to ride the wave of protests, especially those who were older, the 60, 65-year-olds. There were various ages of protesters. There were even some individuals who had come with their children because everyone thought that there was a safe environment to protest. We all tried, to the extent possible, not to allow the Basijis and the plainclothes individuals to ride the wave of the protests of the people. At the time when the first group of people was formed, the number of the participants in the protests was increasing. There were students there. The number of the people was increasing every minute. As the number of the people was increasing, they increased their presence and their military facilities and equipment. At the time, people were being filmed from the air and from the ground. The helicopters were flying over our heads. We saw some people on the top of the roofs at the same time who had covered their faces. They were completely black. They were clad in black. They were monitoring us, and they were taking films from people with hand cameras. And after the number of the population increased, the plainclothes officers were trying to make the atmosphere tense. They were trying to create some form of clash. It is really strange. In the area where we live, where we were protesting, there was not even one stone. People were just throwing bottles of water towards officers. They had walkie-talkies, the people, those. I have seen it with my own eyes. Unfortunately, the film which I had taken has been deleted in my mobile phone. Every moment, the number of the forces increased until about 1:30. We were asked to disperse, to scatter, but we didn't. Every time they said so, they said that they had received orders from a certain place. Each time they mentioned one place, a different place, the governor's office. And at about 1:30, they said that we have order from the top to disperse you completely. We were resisting. And our protests was the most peaceful protests on that day and at that time. The films all show how peaceful it was. You have it. And unfortunately, the police, by using shockers, stun guns, batons, pepper sprays, and other means, made the atmosphere tense. And even a shotgun was aimed at me. And they said, "Aren't you afraid of us?" And I said, "No, I'm just out here for a peaceful protest. We are here to ask for our right. Where do you think I belong to? I'm Iranian, and you are an Iranian." Among the population, among the forces, there were some who had completely covered their faces. You could not identify them. And there were some whose faces were not covered, but still it was very difficult to realize where they had come from. They never spoke a word. And their faces didn't really look like us. We just thought maybe they were brought from other parts of the country, maybe. And the atmosphere became tense at around 2 p.m. We were arrested then. Since we were on the first row, we were the first people who were taken. They shot at us from 2-meter distance. I was shot in the neck and in the waist and in the leg. At the moment when I got injured, they took me to a building close by. When I realized later, that people were shot from the front and the back and the side. And they were hitting people with motorcycles. That's what I saw with my own eyes. And when I was limping out of the building, I saw traces of blood. I heard sounds of shooting. And when the people had dispersed and were going back home, and when I was going back home, a few people looked at me. I felt that they are officers. I should also say that around that huge square, there were armored vehicles and water cannon vehicles. And I may even say other armored vehicles. They were monitoring the situation, and I think they were even eavesdropping the phone calls. I had an injury in my leg. I was trying to flee limpingly. Suddenly I was told to stop, and somebody drew a weapon on me. I didn't realize what happened after. Just 4 people picked me up from the ground. They took me to some place where their cars, vehicles were, and their facilities were. They were arresting the protesters there. So by normal cars, taxis, whatever car was available, ambulances, whatever. They were lifting people. They were taking people and transporting people to elsewhere. Each of the organizations were having their own prisoners, Basij, IRGC, police. They were having each their own prisoners. When they arrested me, they took my mobile from me, they beat us, and they swear at us, used obscene language, and they pushed us in the back of a car where only 3 people should sit. And I may say that there were 7 of us put on the top of each other in the back of that car, and we were taken to the first detention center. When we entered that detention center, it was like the horror tunnels, that they sometimes mention that used to exist at the beginning of the revolution. We went through corridors, we were beaten, and we were kicked and punched, and then we went in. And they said that we will be all killed, and we are below 1,000. That's what we were told. They said that you're under 1,000 individuals, and we will kill you all. Among the people who had been arrested, there were 13, 14-year-old children too. Maybe 5 or 6, 13, 14 years olds were among us. After this, when they wrote down the names and the number of the detainees were increasing, we were taken to the prayer room because the rooms were getting filled up. So we were put into the prayer room. They were calling us one by one, either by name or they broke the locks of our phones, and whoever objected was being beaten brutally. And one of our companions was so beaten that we thought that he would die. Then I was taken to a room alone. There were a number of monitors in that room. I was asked where I got money from to cause unrest in the street. I was threatened. I denied everything because that was not true. Then interrogation started. Whatever the interrogators had written, we should have signed. And they said that we had no right to lawyers. And even if someone wanted to see the paper, again, that individual would have been beaten in the most brutal manner. And when the telephone calls rang, because the families were worried, the family of people sometimes called, the wife, the father, mother, the fiancé. At the time, the officer responded, and they arranged to meet them. Maybe they wanted to take advantage of those fiancés. And among us, there were 13, 14-year-old adolescents who had tattoo. And the officers were using swear words and were touching the private parts of the body of those children. They were asking whether they had tattoo in those places. They were asking for the telephone number of their mother so that they would tell her where the child was. So they were sexually abusing these children, and we witnessed that. And these children said that they were using some medicine. So the officers said that we cannot call your parents for your medicine. There's nothing here. And it was about 11. I don't know what time at night it was, but the child had some problem, and we thought that the child might die. So they called the an urgent room. So they injected something to the child. The child became a bit better. In the prayer room that we were, we could hear what was being said, and we could hear what they said over the walkie-talkie. It was about 12:31 p.m. that a colonel said that people are coming towards that base to occupy it, go to the streets and resist, and go to the streets and pretend that you want to fight against them until the forces would join you. There were about 15, 20 people. They had all types of weapons, stun guns, baton, and shield. The only thing that they did not have was automatic weapons. They had tear gas. They only did not have heavy weapons. And they said that without these facilities, we would not go to the street. This is what we heard with our own eyes and we saw with our own eyes. From the very first moment of the arrest, no medical services were provided to us, and even our injuries were not bandaged, and even if we wanted to have water, we should have waited for hours. I may say that in the 10, 12 hours that we were in the first detention center, we were only given water once. After that, at midnight, they wanted to transfer us to another center. They handcuffed us and chained our legs and blindfolded us. They took us out and put us on a vehicle and took us. It was a big car. It was similar to a bus. Man and woman, all were together. We could realize that there were some women officers among us. We were blindfolded, of course, but we were trying to see and we could hear the sounds. As I could see from behind the blindfold and also from the way the people got off the bus, I may say that there were about 30, 35 people on the bus, 30, 35 women, and there were a larger number of men. The number of men were much higher. We were escorted, and there were some armed individuals who escorted us to the second detention center.
And immediately after our arrival in the second detention center, they stripped us naked. They were touching our private parts. We were completely naked. Once again, they insulted us, they humiliated us, and they put us in cells which were like solitary confinement. And perhaps it is a little bit bigger than the solitary confinement cells that you see in films. And if, for example, normally you could have 4 and 5 people there, they would put 15 people there. And also the lavatory was the same place. And if you wanted to drink water, you would have to use the same hose that you would use to clean yourself after you had gone to the toilet. And we were there a few days, and they fed us once or twice, and the food that they gave us, they said, we have given you the food which is left over from what we have eaten. You are not assigned any meals, and they had just put the food on a piece of dustbin liner, and they just gave it to us. So they would just write whatever they wanted, and I had to forcibly sign it. And do not forget that during this time, our families did not know where we were. They did not know what our situation was. And the cells, the rooms, all had microphones, all had cameras, and we could see what was happening. And we saw a lot of wounded people, broken legs, broken arms, bruised and swollen eyes, fractured head. There was there was somebody who on his back, from his head to his toes, he had pellets in his body. And we saw all this, and it was then that we realized that the protests were going on, and that the forces were inflicting assault and battery on people much more harshly. We did not have any kind of medical facilities over there. Once again, we saw that this 14-year-old boy was sexually abused. He was talked to with sexual slurs. They touched him. They asked, what have you done? Which part of your body? Show us.
Ever file a case or ask for anybody to be prosecuted based on what happened to you?
نه
No. We were told that we didn't have the right for any kind of objection. And they said that until the time that this regime is in power and you are alive, we will keep your case alive, ongoing. And the only thing that we are going to take to eliminate from your case will be non-prosecution. But it's going to be ongoing. It's not going to be closed. And if something happens in the country, the first people that we would come to would be you.
One more clarification question. In your statement, you talk about the fact that they gave people, including children, vaccines. Can you explain a little bit more what that was?
You need to repeat your question, please.
In your
Vale.
statement, you talk about the fact that they give people, including some children, vaccines.
Yes, at the beginning of our arrival at the second detention center, which was a bigger one because it was a central one. And of course, if I want to explain to you, it will take a long time. But when we arrived there, and after a few hours had passed, they came to us, but there were no medical treatment facilities, not even a small tablet, nothing. And they used methadone syrup that you would use for removal of the addiction of drug addicts. He said, if anybody wants something, we will give it to them. Then they said, we want to vaccinate you. First, they said, we want to vaccinate you with influenza vaccines, then hepatitis. And you can put yourselves in our place. There is the government that during that time period was not giving us any kind of medical possibilities, not even a small tablet. How could we trust them to give us what they said is a vaccine to be injected with it? Of course, a few of us went, they were injected. But since the crowd was a big crowd and they were put in different wards, we lost trace of them, and we don't know what happened to those who had been injected, whether it had been true or not. We didn't know anymore.
خواهش میکنم.
Just as you go.
عذر میخوام.
Sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. I just want to say something.
Go ahead.
ببخشید من با
With regard to the interrogator in that central detention center, he came and he gave us a speech. And later on, we heard in Ahvaz, we heard is the same person whose name was Mr. Mirzai, who was armed, and during the nights that the protests were going on, he was patrolling the city and would kill the protesters. He said it himself, and we realized that it was the same person who had become the interrogator of Majid Akhbari also, the one who had been killed.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to probe one area with you which doesn't have and doesn't arise strictly from your evidence. Were there protests? Were there protests in your area before, say, in the preceding year, 2018, 2019, somewhere there?
I'm sorry, the sound was cut off, so I didn't get your question completely. Could you please repeat it?
Were there any protests in your area, say during about a year before Aban in 2019?
بله.
Yes, yes. We had in 1396 and 1397, we had protests in those 2 years. And I was also present during those protests and could see that IRGC and Basij forces were acting there, and they were running people over with their motorbikes and indiscriminately. And I saw myself with my own eyes that they used their shockers on a few women. They hit them on the head with their batons. They fell to the ground. They didn't care. They ran away.
Was the conduct of the authorities the same in the other protests as in this one, more or less, or was it different?
بله.
Yes. Yes. Their conduct was the same in the previous protests. As I said, I was present in the previous protests, and it was precisely like this one. They were using military vehicles, war vehicles. They were using the militia, the Basij, the IRGC. They would give them weapons to act. And even in 1396, in the month of Day, I was making a video, and they caught me, but I could just release myself and escape. It was the same. That's to say, every year that passes and they have seen one protest and they have acted, they have more experience, and then therefore the suppression is harsher.
Protests, does they involve more or less more people, less people, or the same number of people as the protests that we are talking about here?
خدمت
I can say that the protests during previous years had less people, but the protests of 1398 saw a lot of people. Protests in previous years had less people, but now 1398 had a lot of participants, a lot of protesters, because people wanted to finish with the 40 years of the corruption and the murders of this regime.
خواهش میکنم.
No problem. Suffice it to say that among the detainees, we also had also Afghans, the dear Afghans who are the neighboring country. They had also been detained. I forgot to say this, but of course the story is much more detailed than this. I think I have talked about this in my written statements, and I don't think you will have enough time for me to talk about them here right now in this tribunal.
Mr. Witness, just a couple of questions, if I may. I just want to go back to when you're first...
بفرمایید.
Yes, go ahead, please, says the witness.
Thank you. I want to go back to when you're first arrested. And you say in your statement, 4 or 5 plainclothes men suddenly lifted me off the ground. Perhaps 7 or 8 of them threw me on the back of a Samand vehicle on others. Who was it who arrested? Which agency
بله.
did they come from? Do you know that?
As I submitted to you, we had lots of plainclothes forces. That's to say, they always use them in protests. And those who were arresting people, I can say that half of those who were arresting were plainclothes people. We did not know from which organ or institution they came or body they came. We didn't know. Because they had suits on, they were in normal clothing.
When you're taken to a detention center, did you learn then who it was who was detaining you? Which security
نه خیر، نه نه
agency?
نه ما رو بردن به
No, no. You see, it depends on the place that they take you to. For example, the location that we were taken to was for the police, for moral security. I think it was theirs. But afterwards, when I saw the label, I saw I thought that it was there. So this location belonged to this kind of police, and therefore they would fall under the cover of the police force. Perhaps there were also another organ, but that's how I understood it.
You say this in your statement. When we were getting off the vehicle, I wanted to open the vehicle's door and throw myself below. One of them saw this and beat me up. There was a 13-year-old kid, a youth of 17, 2 others 20 to 30 years old. How old were you at this time?
Now I am 40 years old, and then 2 years ago, well, you would know if I am 40 years now. 2 years ago, I would have been 38.
And the description you give of what happened then seems to suggest that for some reason the younger people arrested with you were getting most of the beatings. Is that what you're telling the tribunal?
Yes, 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 yes. It is completely true. Yes, correct.
It also seems to follow from what you've said and what's in your written statement that it's the children or the 13-year-old child which seems to be subjected, at least in this early stage, to the sexual taunts. Is that correct?
Yes. I have to also say that the father of this boy was a military person. That's what he said himself.
When did you encounter the father?
نه نه من
No, I didn't see him. The boy said that. The boy said that. The boy said that the father is a military colonel. And he was saying if my father finds out that I am here, he would ring once and I would be out of here. And until the very last moment, they didn't let the mother to know that he had been detained because they had taken his mobile away from him and nobody knew where he was. I have to say that for 10 days, no family had any idea where we were, whether we were alive or we were dead.
Thank you. Now, I just fast forward a little to a place you call, I don't think this is giving anything away, but let me call it the central place where you were taken. Do you recall that evidence?
بله
Yes, I do.
بله بازداشتگاه مرکزی.
Central Detention Center.
And you describe in your statement, quote, we wore only the underwear,
بله
and yet the functionaries would put on gloves in their hands and would touch all our private
بله
parts.
بله
Yeah.
ما توس
Okay, wait a second, Mr. Witness.
بله بله
Wait. What I'm interested in is whether you're suggesting that this was a search, an excessive search, or there was some, as you perceived it, sexual motivation.
شاید
Maybe for us who were a bit older, for example, for me who I was 38 or the older ones, it was not sexual, but for the younger ones, the 18-year-old ones, 15, 14, or even 13-year-old ones, that was a bit too much. It was more than just a similar body search. I believe it was somehow a sexual harassment.
The younger ones, in your statement you talk about 40 to 50 boys of 13, 15 and 18 years of age. Is that correct? Prosecuting counsel, whilst the witness, oh, he's back. I'll deal with that in a second. Mr. Witness, can you hear me?
بله بله
Yes, I do.
My question was, we're still at the Central Detention Centre, and are you suggesting
بله
that it's the 40 to 50 boys of 13, 15 and 18 years of age who are subjected to these searches with some kind of sexual motivation?
نگاه کنین از سنین مختلف
They were from different age groups, 13, 14, 15, up to 18, 20, 50, 60. There were all ages among us. And in the Central Detention Center, when we were taken there, since the children below 18 were separated from us afterwards. From that Central Detention Center, they separated those who were below 18 from us.
Are you suggesting they were treated differently to you older detainees? In terms of the searches, in terms of the comments, in terms of motivation?
بله.
Yes, exactly.
Just so that we're all clear how that was, describe how it was different.
ما که
We had never seen such a bodily search before, but anyway, the body search, which, as they called it, we who were brought from outside, anyway, in the Central Detention Center. When we reached the Central Detention Center, we had been brought from 2 other detention centers. So we had already been searched. There was no need for so many body searches. We were objecting, we were protesting. We had nothing with us. There was no need for them to touch us and to touch every private part of our body time and again. It was much worse than what you can think. And some were being really badly touched.
And okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you. Just for counsel,
خواهش میکنم.
I note that there's a reference to an internationally known wrestler, and I wondered if you'd forgotten to talk to the witness about that, or whether you'd just decided not to.
You can ask him about it. He mentioned it at the end of his statement.
Okay. I just want to understand this issue of the wrestler, Navid Afkari. What information do you have about that?
My information is a general one. Everyone is aware that he was arrested during the protests. And according to the evidence that we saw and heard from various channels, and also the past record of the government in suppressing the voice of the people, naturally speaking, we realized that this was similar to other scenarios of the government. And we realized that this individual was also innocent. We are aware of his fate similar to the other people. And there was an interrogator who talked to all of us, Mr. Mirzai. He said that he had a sidearm. He used to walk around in the city. Whatever protester he saw, he just shot him and killed him and left. And he said that he was present in Syria and Iraq. Later on, we realized, or I may say that we heard, I cannot be certain, of course, but we heard from some news channels that an individual called Mirzai was the interrogator of Mr. Afkari, and I immediately thought that maybe that was the same interrogator who talked to all of us and threatened us. Maybe he was the same interrogator of Mr. Afkari.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Witness.
خواهش میکنم.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Mr. Witness, you said
بفرمایید.
that in that day you saw a protester giving the security police a flower, asking them not to cross the crowd, while you also...
بله بله. اعتراض ما
We were having a peaceful protest. That's why flower was given.
And you also said that the plainclothesman threw water bottle and provoke the police to attack people.
بله بله بله.
Yeah.
درسته.
Yes, that is correct.
Did the people confront the plainclothes who provoke the people?
I was one of those people among the protesters. When I saw that the plainclothes individuals were throwing bottles, I was talking to them. I said, there is no need for violence. They are Iranians, we are Iranians. We are just having a peaceful protest. Don't allow it to become violent. We want no blood. Our protest was completely peaceful. I am ready to swear to any religion that you believe in that even the people over there did not have access to one stone to throw. They did not throw even one bottle of water. Later on, we heard that banks from a month before had taken their important documents away. They were all in a ready situation. The police was in ready status, even from climatic point of view. They knew when to increase the prices of petrol so that it would be, so that the announcement would come on a day when it is raining, so that the people would not be able to turn out into the streets and to continue their protests. I believe that this scenario was pre-planned by the government, and as everyone is aware and has been a witness, the protests were suppressed after the speech by Khamenei, the supreme leader, and it became bloodier. And the ones who were a witness to this fact and were outside and had seen the scene, they said that the helicopters began flying much more, and there were a lot of much more sounds of shootings and the like after his speech.
Yeah, I would like to understand, only you who talk to the plainclothes people who provoke the people, and or other people also like try to protect a police from the attack?
نه من تنها نبودم.
It wasn't just me. There were other people who also objected to the throwing of bottles. Some people who were older than me, some people who were younger than me, everyone from every age. We all tried not to have anything thrown towards the police. We didn't want to make the police furious so that they would have an excuse to attack people. We were all coordinated. We all who were protesting on that day were all on the same page. Nobody wanted to harm the police. I am ready to swear that those individuals were Basijis, were from the Guards Corps with plain clothes. They were trying just to cause unrest, give an excuse to the police to suppress people.
How did the police react to the plainclothes who provoked them and thrown a water bottle to them?
پلیس
Well, the police did react, and the police does react. The bottles were thrown at the police. So us who were on the first rows received some pepper sprays, baton beating, stun gun. So these were the ones that were used against us at the first hours before heavy weapons and military weapons were used.
Thank you. And
خواهش میکنم.
You're welcome.
you also, in your written statement, you indicate that you wrote a slogan. Could you tell the tribunal what kind of slogan you wrote, and gave it to the crowd?
ببخشید جواب دادن این سوال
I apologize. I cannot respond to your question. It might reveal my identity.
Then, thank you. And yeah, the last question is in relation to your statement that you said that the one who in charge and spoke to the people was Iranian, and the others were not Iranian. What are you trying to
بین اون کسایی
Among the forces who were present, there were different uniforms and clothes. We had the police force, we had the special unit of the police force, we had the Basijis. There were different forms and colors of uniforms and clothes. And there were some forces who had covered their faces, and there were some forces who had not covered their faces. Our impression and understanding was that some of them were not of Iranian ethnicity. They both did not speak in Persian. They did not address us. They didn't even speak among themselves. There were just one or two individuals who spoke among themselves and responded to the walkie-talkie calls and like that and talked to us, protesters. Because we were on the first row, we could completely see them and monitor them. And we felt that these forces, based on the experience that we had from the previous years, were brought in from the neighboring countries. That was what we felt, at least. We felt that they did not even understand our language, and they didn't speak because of the same reason.
Thank you, Mr. Witness, for the question.
خواهش میکنم
I think that's it from the panel, Council.
Thank you, Mr. Witness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Witness.
ببخشید من میتونم یه صحبت کنم
Would you allow me to say something? I wanted to thank the tribunal and all those who registered and recorded our testimony and statements in the past 2 years and finally held this tribunal so that the world would hear our voice. I'm really grateful to all of you. Thank you very much. I have nothing to add.
We're grateful to you, Mr. Witness, for taking the decision to testify and assist the tribunal in its work. Thank you.